My daughter looked me in the eyes the night before her gala and told me I embarrass her. Not upset, not angry, calm, like she was reading me a weather report. And 12 hours later, a man in a tuxedo stood at a podium in front of 400 people and said my name into a microphone like it was the most important word in the room. She froze. I want you to sit with that image for a second, because it took me 66 years to get there, and I'm going to walk you through every single one of them. My name is Walter Kessler. Everyone who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I'm 66 years old. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I built a company from a card table in my garage on East 51st Street into something that mattered. I used to believe that if you did the work quietly, kept your word, and loved people without keeping score, that would be enough. That the people closest to you would see what was underneath, not just what was on the surface. I was wrong about that for a long time. This is the story of the night I found out just how wrong, and the one moment I will remember for the rest of my life. Standing in a hallway outside a ballroom in a 35-year-old suit, listening to a room full of strangers stand up for me before my own daughter would. Let me back up. I started Kessler Structural Group in 1983, the year after I married my wife Carol. We were 25 years old, broke, living in a rented duplex off South Lewis Avenue. And I had exactly one client, a strip mall developer named Ed Torvik, who needed somebody to check his roof load calculations for $40 a job. Carol did the books at our kitchen table with a calculator that ran on batteries we couldn't always afford to replace. We had our daughter, Renee, in 1990. By then the company had 11 employees and a real office on South Yale Avenue. And I remember standing in the hospital hallway at St. John's holding her, 7 pounds 2 ounces, thinking I would spend the rest of my life making sure that little girl never had to worry about anything the way Carol and I had worried in that duplex. I kept that promise. Maybe too well. By 2015, Kessler Structural Group had 94 employees for offices across Oklahoma and Texas, and a reputation for signing off on buildings that never failed. In the fall of 2019, a national engineering firm out of Chicago offered to buy us out. I won't give you the exact number here, because it doesn't matter yet, but I'll tell you it had 8 figures in front of the decimal point. I sold. I kept the truck. I kept the house on East 61st Street we'd lived in since 1994. I kept wearing the same brown suit I'd bought in 1989 for Renee's baptism, because it still fit, and because Carol always said a suit that fits is a suit worth keeping. Carol passed in March of 2021. Congestive heart failure, the kind that sneaks up on you over years and then takes everything in about 6 weeks. She was 61. I won't dwell on that part, because if I do, I won't get through the rest of this. But I need you to understand something about my wife before you understand anything else about this story. Carol Kessler never once in 38 years of marriage cared what anybody thought of the truck in our driveway. She used to say the people worth having in your life will love you in a rusty Ford just as much as in a Lincoln. I believed her. I still do. Renee is 34 now. She married a man named Preston Holt about 6 years ago, a real estate developer whose family has had money in Tulsa for 3 generations. The kind of family with a wing named after them at the Art Museum and a table reserved every year at every gala this city throws. Preston is fine, by the way. I want to be fair here, because people ask me that a lot. Preston never once said a cruel word to me directly. He just has a way of looking past you, like you're a chair somebody forgot to move. Renee is different. Renee grew up watching her father come home smelling like drywall dust and diesel, driving a truck with a cracked windshield, and somewhere along the way, after she married into the Holt family, she decided that version of me was something to manage, something to explain before people met it. It didn't happen all at once. I want to be honest about that too, because if I told you it was one dramatic turn, I'd be lying to you, and I promised myself a long time ago I wasn't going to lie in this story. It happened in small pieces over about 2 years. It happened at her 32nd birthday dinner at a restaurant on Cherry Street, when she asked me, gently, if I could maybe wear something other than the brown suit. It happened at Preston's father's retirement party at Southern Hills, when Renee introduced me to a table of Holt family friends as my father. He used to be an engineer, used to, past tense, like Kessler Structural Group, had been a hobby I'd since outgrown. It happened at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when I mentioned a bridge retrofit project I'd consulted on for the state. Just a small comment over turkey, and Renee's mother-in-law asked what a retrofit was, and Renee jumped in before I could answer and changed the subject to the wine. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I'm an engineer. Noticing load-bearing stress before it becomes a crack is the whole job. My best friend, Jim Halloway, noticed it too, and he's not shy about saying so. Jim and I have known each other since 1979, back when he was still pouring concrete for a living and I was drafting blueprints out of a spare bedroom. We play golf most Saturday mornings at a public course off 71st Street, the kind of course with a snack bar instead of a clubhouse, which Jim insists is the only honest kind of golf course left in Tulsa. About 3 weeks before everything I'm about to tell you happened, Jim and I were sitting in a booth at a diner on Memorial Drive, the kind of place that still serves coffee in real mugs, and I told him about the birthday dinner comment, the brown suit thing. She said that to you? Jim set his fork down. Gently, I said. She said it gently. Walt, there's no gentle way to tell your father his suit embarrasses you. Jim shook his head. You built a company that put roofs over half of downtown Tulsa that didn't fall down in an ice storm. You could buy that whole restaurant she took you to and not blink. She doesn't know that, I said. Jim looked at me for a long moment. Why not? That was a fair question, and it's the one I want you to hold on to, because it matters for everything that comes after. I never told Renee what the company sold for. Carol and I made that decision together, years before she passed, sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where she used to do the books. We agreed that money changes how people look at you, and we didn't want our daughter to grow up or grow into adulthood, measuring us by a number. We wanted her to love the truck and the suit and the man in them. I know how that sounds now. I know exactly how naive that sounds. But it's what we chose, and for a long time, I thought it was the right choice. I didn't know it yet, but that decision was about to collide with something else I'd been keeping quiet, something even bigger than the sale of my company, and the collision was going to happen in front of 400 strangers in black tie. Here's the part one have to explain carefully, because the timing matters. In the spring of 2021, about 6 weeks after Carol died, I got a call from a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, the chief of pediatric cardiology at Grayson Children's Hospital here in Tulsa. Carol had spent the last 4 years of her life volunteering in that hospital's family waiting room, 3 mornings a week, bringing coffee to parents whose kids were on the cardiac floor, the same floor, as it turned out, that eventually treated her own heart before it gave out. Dr. Marsh told me the hospital's pediatric cardiac unit was 30 years old, undersized, and outdated, and they were trying to raise $14 million to build a new wing. She wasn't calling to ask me for money. She was calling to tell me Carol had been the first person on the volunteer roster to donate blood every single drive for 4 straight years, and she wanted me to know that, because she thought I should hear it from someone other than a sympathy card. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot after that call for almost 40 minutes. 3 days later, I called Dr. Marsh back and told her I wanted to fund the wing. All $14 million. One condition. It stays anonymous. I didn't want my name on a plaque while I was still breathing, and I certainly didn't want my daughter finding out about it from a press release before she found out about it from me. I set the gift up through a trust with my attorney, a woman named Denise Okafor who's handled my affairs since the sale of the company, and the paperwork listed the donor as simply the Carol K. Fund. Nobody outside that hospital board and my attorney's office knew my name was attached to it. Not Renee, not Preston, not even Jim, until about a year in, when he happened to see the paperwork on my kitchen table and I had to ask him to sit on it. The wing opened in April of 2023. They named it the Carol Kessler Pavilion for Pediatric Cardiology. I went to the ribbon cutting in a gray suit, stood in the back, shook a few hands, and left before the local news crew could get my name on camera. Renee wasn't there. She didn't know it existed. As far as she knew, her father was a retired engineer living comfortably but modestly on East 61st Street, and her mother's memorial had something to do with a hospital volunteer program. Nothing more specific than that. I want to be clear about something, because people ask me this too when I tell this story. I wasn't hiding that gift to punish Renee or to set some kind of trap. I was hiding it because Carol and I had already decided, years before, that this was how we wanted to live. Quietly. I never once imagined the hiding and the gala would end up in the same room together. Life has a way of doing that on its own, without any help from you. Which brings me to the Aurora Gala. Every October, Grayson Children's Hospital throws its biggest fundraiser of the year at the Regency Ballroom near Southern Hills, a black tie event that draws most of the money in this city into one room for a single night. Preston's family has had a table at the Aurora Gala for as long as anyone can remember. Renee had been co-chairing the planning committee for 2 years, working alongside the hospital's development director, a sharp young woman named Meredith Voss, whom I'd actually met twice already without Renee knowing it, because Meredith was the one who managed the Carol K. fund relationship on the hospital's end. This year's gala fell on Saturday, October the 18th. It was, though nobody had told me yet, the 5th anniversary of the pavilion's groundbreaking, and the hospital board had decided, after 5 years of my saying no, that this was finally the year they were going to reveal the donor's name publicly, whether I liked it or not. Dr. Marsh had called me twice that September asking permission. I'd said no both times. The third time, in early October, she told me the board was voting on it either way, out of gratitude, and she was hoping I'd at least be in the room when they did it, rather than hear about it secondhand. I still hadn't fully agreed to attend by the time Renee came to my house. It was Friday evening, October the 17th, the night before the gala. I was in the kitchen washing a single plate from a single dinner, the kind of quiet that still catches me off guard sometimes. 3 years after Carol, when I heard Renee's car pull into the driveway. She let herself in with her old key, the way she's done since she was 16, and I remember she was already dressed for a work event she had that evening. A navy dress, heels, her hair done. She looked, if I'm honest, exactly like a Holt. "Dad," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "I need to talk to you about tomorrow." "The gala," I said. "I was going to call you about that." "I know you were invited," she said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, the way you talk when you've rehearsed a sentence in the car. "Preston's mother had your name added to the list months ago, before I could really say anything about it." I set the plate in the drying rack. "You didn't want me there." "It's not that I don't want you there." She crossed her arms. "It's just, Dad, these events, they're not really your kind of thing. It's a lot of small talk, a lot of people asking what you do, and I never know what to." She stopped herself. What to say, I finished for her. She didn't argue with that. That's the part one want you to notice. She didn't argue. "Renee," I said, keeping my voice even, "just say what you came here to say." She looked at the floor for a second, then back up at me, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse than if she'd shouted it. "You embarrass us at every event, Dad." She said it plainly, like a fact she'd been carrying around and was finally setting down. "The Christmas party at the Petrolia Club, when you told everyone about load calculations for 20 minutes. Preston's cousin's wedding, when you wore work boots with your suit because your dress shoes were, I don't even know, at the shop. Every single time, I spend the whole night managing what people think of you instead of just enjoying myself. And tomorrow is the biggest night of the year for me professionally. I need it to go smoothly. I need you to just come, say hello, and maybe leave before the program starts. Please." I stood there in my own kitchen, dish towel in my hand, and I want to tell you I felt anger. I didn't, not right away. What I felt was something closer to what Carol must have felt in a hospital bed near the end. That strange calm that comes right before you understand something is actually happening and not just a bad thought passing through. "I hear you," I said. She looked relieved, and something in that relief hurt more than the request itself. "Thank you for understanding, Dad. I love you. I just need tomorrow to go well." She kissed my cheek and left, the way she always does, quick, already thinking about the next thing. I stood in that kitchen a long time after her car pulled out of the driveway. "I called Jim that night." She said, "What?" Jim's voice came through flat, the way it does right before he gets loud. "She wants me to leave before the program starts," I said. "Leave before the part where they say my name." There was a pause on Jim's end so long I thought the call had dropped. "Walt," he finally said. "Are you going to tell her? Tonight? Before tomorrow?" I looked at the dish towel still in my hand. "No. Why not?" "Because I want to see what she says when it's true whether she knows it or not," I said. "I've spent 3 years hiding this because Carol and I decided it should be quiet. Tomorrow it's not going to be quiet anymore, whether I say a word or not. I just have to decide what kind of man walks into that room." Jim was quiet again. "You've got that suit still. The brown one." "I do." "Wear it," Jim said. "Wear it exactly like she doesn't want you to." I didn't know it yet, standing in my kitchen holding a dish towel. But the next night, I was going to find out exactly how far my own daughter would let her father stand outside a door before she'd fight to let him in. And I want you to remember that question, because it's going to come back around before this story is finished. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. If you're just joining us, grab something warm to drink, settle in, because this one's got a turn coming that I promise you won't see all the way to the bottom of. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe, because we've got a lot more stories like this one coming. Saturday, October the 18th, arrived cool and clear, the kind of Tulsa fall day where the leaves along Riverside Drive turn the color of a struck match. I spent most of the afternoon in my garden, which is not something I usually do on a Saturday, but I needed my hands busy while my mind worked through what was coming. Dr. Marsh called me at 4 o'clock. Walt, the board voted unanimously last night. We're announcing tonight, during the program, right before the paddle race. I know you didn't fully sign off, and I'm sorry for pushing, but I wanted you to hear the details from me, not from a stage. Tell me the details, I said. Meredith's going to introduce a short film about the pavilion. Then I'll come up and talk about the fund. And then I'm going to ask you to stand, if you're in the room, so we can thank you properly. That's it. No microphone in your hand unless you want it. I told her I'd be there. I didn't tell her about the conversation with Renee the night before. That felt like a separate matter, one I needed to carry into that ballroom myself. I put on the brown suit at 6:15. It still fit, same as it had in 1989, maybe a little looser in the shoulders now. I looked at myself in the mirror in our bedroom, Carol's side of the closet still half full of her things because I haven't been able to clear it out yet, and I thought about what she would have said. She would have told me to wear exactly what I was wearing. She would have told me the truck too. So I drove the truck. The same 2003 Ford F-150, cracked windshield replaced, but the paint faded on the hood. The one Renee has asked me more than once to trade in for something that matches the neighborhood. I parked it myself in the valet line outside the Regency Ballroom, ignoring the two younger men in vests who looked at it like it had wandered in from the wrong century, and I walked toward the entrance with my invitation in my jacket pocket. Here's where it got complicated. The woman at the check-in table, a young volunteer with a tablet, scrolled through the guest list twice and couldn't find my name. Kessler, she said, apologetic. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not showing a Walter Kessler on tonight's list. Are you sure it's under that name? I stood there a moment. I want to be honest with you, because I promised I would be honest in this story. For about 10 seconds, standing in that lobby in my old suit, while well-dressed strangers moved past me toward the ballroom doors, I wondered if Renee had quietly pulled my name off the list after our conversation the night before. Not out of cruelty, just out of the same careful management she'd been doing for 2 years, the kind of small erasure that doesn't feel like a decision when you make it, just a convenience. I gave the volunteer my name again and asked her to check under Holt, in case the invitation had been folded into Preston's family table. She found it there, a single seat added late, tucked at the far edge of table 12, the Holt family table, added, she told me, only about 10 days ago. I stood in that hallway outside the ballroom doors for a few minutes after that, invitation in hand, listening to the low hum of 400 conversations happening on the other side of a set of double doors I hadn't walked through yet. I could hear a string quartet. I could hear laughter. I thought about what Renee had said in my kitchen the night before. Come, say hello, leave before the program starts. And for the first time all day, I felt something harden in my chest, quiet and certain, the same feeling I used to get right before I signed off on a structural calculation I was completely sure of. I walked in. I found table 12 near the back corner of the ballroom, half hidden by a floral display. Taller than I was. Renee was 3 tables up, near the stage, seated beside Preston and his parents, laughing at something his mother had said. She hadn't seen me yet. I sat down at my assigned seat, nodded to the 2 Holt cousins across from me who clearly had no idea who I was, and ate my salad quietly while the room moved around me exactly the way Renee had wanted it to. Invisible. Managed. Dinner service ended around 8:15. The lights dimmed slightly, and Meredith Voss walked up to the podium at the front of the ballroom in a deep green gown, tapping the microphone once. Good evening, she said, and the room settled. 5 years ago, this hospital broke ground on something that changed how we care for the smallest hearts in this city. Tonight, before we get to the paddle race, I want to take a few minutes to tell you the story behind the Carol Kessler Pavilion. I felt my whole body go still. A screen behind Meredith lit up with photographs. I recognized them immediately. Carol in the family waiting room, pouring coffee into paper cups, her volunteer badge crooked on her cardigan the way it always was. Carol laughing with a nurse I remembered meeting once. A photo I didn't even know existed. Carol sitting with a young mother in the cardiac unit, holding the woman's hand, both of them looking at something off camera. 3 tables up, I watched Renee go very still. Dr. Marsh took the podium next, and she told the room what I had never told my daughter. That a widower in this city had walked into her office 6 weeks after losing his wife and funded an entire $14 million cardiac pavilion in her name, on one condition, that his own name never appear on it while he was alive. That he had shown up to the ribbon cutting in a gray suit and left before the news cameras could catch his face. That the board had spent 5 years respecting that wish, and had finally, this year, asked permission to break it, because gratitude, Dr. Marsh said, deserves a name attached to it eventually, even when the man behind it would rather it didn't. Tonight, she said, for the first time, we'd like to properly thank the donor behind the Carol K. Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, if he's willing, please help me welcome Mr. Walter Kessler. The room turned. I want to describe this carefully, because it happened in about 4 seconds, and it has stayed with me every day since. For 100 faces swiveled toward table 12, toward a man in a 35-year-old brown suit sitting quietly near a floral arrangement, and somewhere in the middle of that turning room, I watched my daughter's face do something I will never forget. The color left it. Her fork, halfway to her mouth, stopped completely still in the air. Preston turned to look at her, then at me, then back at her, his expression doing a slow and very public recalculation. His mother's mouth opened slightly and did not close for a long moment. Renee didn't move. She just stared at me across 3 tables, her eyes doing the thing eyes do when a person is trying to fit an entirely new fact into a version of their father they've been carrying around for years, and finding that it does not fit no matter which way they turn it. I stood up slowly. I didn't wave. I didn't smile the big showy smile some men would have used in that moment. I just stood, the way you stand when a room asks you to, calm, steady, my hands loose at my sides, and I let 400 strangers do something my own daughter hadn't done in 2 years, which was look at me like I mattered exactly as I was. The applause started somewhere near the front and rolled backward through the room like weather. It went on longer than I expected. Dr. Marsh asked me, gently, if I'd say a few words, and I want to tell you I almost said no, the way I'd said no 3 times already that month. But I looked at Renee's face one more time, still frozen, still staring, and I decided this was the moment I'd been quietly waiting for without knowing it. I walked to the podium. My knees weren't as steady as I would have liked. I stood there in my old suit and looked out over that ballroom, and I spoke without notes, because I've never needed notes to talk about Carol. My wife spent 4 years in this hospital's waiting room, I said, long before she ever needed one of its beds herself. She never once asked anybody for thanks. She just showed up 3 mornings a week, with a pot of coffee and enough patience for every scared parent on that floor. When she passed, I had a choice about what to do with some money that honestly never meant much to either of us beyond what it could build. I built this, quietly, because that's how Carol and I chose to live for 38 years. Quietly, without keeping score, and without needing anybody to see the receipts. I paused. I'll tell you something else. I've spent the last 2 years thinking that being quiet about who I am was protecting the people I love from having to explain me at dinner parties. Tonight I understand that's not quite what it was doing. So I want to say thank you to this hospital and to Dr. Marsh for finally making me stand up. It turns out I needed it more than I let on. I stepped down to another round of applause, and I walked back toward table 12. And that's when I saw her coming toward me through the crowd, weaving between chairs, her navy dress catching the light, her face still pale. Dad. Renee's voice came out smaller than I'd heard it in years. You never, all this time, you never told me. You never asked what I did with the money from the company, I said, gently, because I wasn't there to wound her, not really. You asked me to leave before the program started. She flinched. I watched it land, the exact weight of her own words from my kitchen the night before, coming back to her in the middle of the biggest room she'd ever stood in. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know any of this. I know you didn't, I said. That's the part one have to take responsibility for too. Your mother and I decided a long time ago to keep this quiet, and I let that quiet turn into something else. I let you grow up thinking your father was a man to be managed instead of a man to be proud of, and some of that is on me, Renee. Not all of it. but some. She didn't say anything for a moment. Preston had walked up behind her by then, and for the first time in 6 years, he looked directly at me. Really looked, the way you look at a chair when you suddenly realize it's load-bearing. Now, I promised you a warm moment in this story, one that isn't about who got humbled and who didn't, and this is where it comes in, because the truest part of that whole night wasn't Renee's face when my name got called. It was what happened about 20 minutes later, over by the dessert table, when a girl I love more than almost anyone in this world found me before her own mother did. My granddaughter, Lily, is 12. She's Renee and Preston's only child, and she has been, since she was small enough to sit on my knee, the one person in that family who never once seemed to notice or care what suit I had on. Lily had begged her mother for months to come to this gala, even though it's technically an adult's event, because Meredith Voss runs a junior volunteer program at the hospital that Lily's been part of since she was 9, folding get-well cards and reading to kids in the waiting room, 3 Saturdays a month, quiet work nobody claps for. She found me by the dessert table, in a purple dress a size too big that Renee had probably bought for her to grow into, and she threw both arms around my waist before I even saw her coming. "Grandpa," she said into my jacket, "that was you? The whole hospital wing? You built that?" "I helped," I said. "Your grandmother's the one who earned it." Lily pulled back and looked up at me, and there wasn't a trace of surprise in her face. Not really, just a kind of quiet satisfaction, like something she'd always suspected had finally been confirmed. "I told the other kids in the volunteer program my grandpa was the most important man I know," she said. "I didn't even know why. I just knew it. I'm not ashamed to tell you that got me, right there by the dessert table, more than the applause had." 2 weeks after the gala, I called Denise Okafor, my attorney, and asked her to set up a new education trust, fully funded, in Lily's name, to cover every year of schooling she wants, straight through whatever kind of nursing or medical program she eventually chooses, because she's already told me twice she wants to work in that same cardiac unit someday. I didn't do it to teach anybody a lesson. I did it because Lily has spent 3 years showing up for me exactly the way Carol used to show up for strangers in that waiting room, without being asked, without keeping score, and in my experience, that kind of loyalty is the only currency that was ever really worth anything to begin with. Renee and I talked more in the month after the gala than we had in the 2 years before it. I won't pretend it fixed everything overnight, because that's not how families actually work, no matter how the story gets told. She came to the house on East 61st Street on a Sunday in early November, sat at the same kitchen table Carol used to do the books on, and told me she'd spent the drive home from the gallery playing every event over the last 2 years where she'd asked me to be smaller. The birthday dinner, the retirement party, the wedding. She said she used to tell herself she was protecting our relationship from other people's judgment, and that night she finally understood she'd actually just been protecting her own comfort, at my expense, one small request at a time. "I don't need an apology tour, Renee," I told her. "I need you to just let me be who I am at your table, whichever suit I've got on." She cried a little at that, and I let her, because I think she needed to. Preston, for what it's worth, has been different since that night too. He shook my hand at Thanksgiving this year, actually looked at me while he did it, and asked me a real question about a bridge retrofit project I mentioned, the same kind of comment his mother had once waved off as boring. I don't know if that's permanent. I don't need it to be dramatic. I just noticed it, the way I notice things. I still drive the truck. I still have the brown suit hanging in my closet, and I wore it again this spring to Lily's junior volunteer recognition dinner at the hospital, where they gave her a small certificate for 200 hours of service, and where Dr. Marsh introduced me from the audience as a friend of the pavilion, which is exactly how I like it now. Quiet mostly, but not hidden. There's a difference, and it took me 66 years and one ballroom full of strangers to finally understand it. I think about Carol a lot when I sit in that garden now, and I think about something she used to say whenever anybody in this town tried to measure a person by their car, or their suit, or their table number at a gala. She used to say the truth doesn't need an invitation. It shows up whether you send for it or not, and when it does, it's usually wearing exactly the clothes it always wore, standing exactly where it always stood, waiting for the room to finally notice. I noticed her every single day of 38 years, in a rented duplex, and in a house on East 61st Street, and in a hospital hallway near the end. It only took my daughter one night in a ballroom to notice me the same way. I'm grateful it happened while I'm still here to see it. still able to drive that old truck home afterward with the windows down, still able to sit at Lily's junior volunteer dinner in a suit that still fits, still able to say her grandmother's name out loud in a room full of people who now know exactly what it built. Some men spend a lifetime trying to be seen. I spent most of mine trying not to be, and I understand now that both extremes can cost you something if you're not careful. The trick, I think, the one I wish somebody had told me 40 years ago, is to let the people who actually love you see the whole picture. Quietly if you can, loudly if you have to, but never hidden entirely, not even from the ones closest to you. Especially not from them. If this story meant something to you tonight, I hope you'll hit that like button and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you know somebody who's spent a lifetime being quiet about who they really are, maybe send this one their way. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are a lot more stories like mine still to come. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you on the next.